At 77, Stevie Nicks is opening up like never before, and what she's saying about Lindsey Buckingham has fans stunned. After decades of love, music, and fights, Stevie is finally breaking down what she calls Lindsey's ultimate betrayal. What really happened behind closed doors to tear them apart for good. Stick around as we dive deep into the story behind Stevie Nicks, Lindsey Buckingham, and the betrayal that ended it all. Before Fleetwood Mac, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham first crossed paths in the late 1960s at Menlo Atherton High School in Atherton, California. They weren't close friends right away. In fact, Stevie didn't even know Lindsey when she saw him performing California Dreamin' at a school function. She later said she thought he was cute, and something about his energy stood out. Not long after, Lindsey noticed Stevie too. When a spot opened in a local music group, they invited Stevie to join as a vocalist. Soon, they were making music together often. One of their first songs to rehearse together was California Dreamin', the same one Stevie had seen Lindsey sing before. The more they sang together, the closer they grew. Somewhere between rehearsals and small performances, their friendship turned romantic. They started dating, and their connection deepened through music. After high school, both Stevie and Lindsey joined a local rock band called Fritz. Stevie was brought in as the lead singer, while Lindsey played guitar and contributed vocals. Fritz wasn't a huge act, but they had some notable moments. They opened for major artists like Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Jefferson Airplane, an impressive achievement for a band that wasn't signed to a major label. The experience helped Stevie and Lindsey grow as performers. They learned what it was like to be on stage, to tour, and to work as a unit with other musicians. But it also came with challenges. Even though Stevie had a powerful voice and stage presence, she wasn't always taken seriously. Some people in and around the band viewed her as just Lindsey's girlfriend, not a full creative partner. That was frustrating for her. She wanted to be recognized as a serious artist, not someone who was just tagging along. By 1972, Fritz had broken up. Stevie and Lindsey, still a couple, decided to try making it on their own. Stevie and Lindsey moved to Los Angeles to chase their dream of making it in the music industry. It wasn't easy. They were broke and unknown in a city full of talent. They poured all their money and energy into recording an album. The result was Buckingham Nicks, released in 1973. It featured songs they wrote and recorded together. They were proud of it, but the album didn't sell. It was a commercial failure, and the record label dropped them soon after. They didn't give up, but things got harder. They were running out of money, and the stress began to wear on their relationship. Stevie took on several jobs to support them. She worked as a waitress, a cleaner, and sometimes even helped as a dental assistant. Lindsey stayed home working on music, which sometimes made Stevie feel like she was carrying too much of the load. They fought often, both emotionally and financially strained. It was a hard time, but it would lead to a chance encounter that changed everything. In 1974, a producer played one of their songs at a studio where Mick Fleetwood happened to be listening. That moment would soon launch them into a completely different world, and that's when the real chaos began. The breakthrough and breaking point. By late 1974, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham were struggling. Their album Buckingham Nicks had flopped. They were broke, and they were wondering if they should give up on music altogether. Then, out of nowhere, their luck changed in a way neither of them could have predicted. At Sound City Studios in Los Angeles, producer Keith Olsen was showing off the studio's sound quality to Fleetwood Mac drummer Mick Fleetwood. To give him an example of the studio's production power, Olsen played a track from Buckingham Nicks called Frozen Love. Mick Fleetwood was impressed, not just by the sound, but by the guitar work. That guitarist was Lindsey Buckingham. At the time, Fleetwood Mac was a British blues rock band going through big changes. Their lead guitarist, Bob Welch, had just left. Mick was searching for a replacement. When he heard Lindsey's guitar playing, he saw potential right away. He approached Lindsey with an offer to join Fleetwood Mac. But Lindsey had one condition. If he joined, Stevie Nicks had to join too. Mick and the rest of Fleetwood Mac weren't sure about bringing in a female singer they didn't know, but they agreed to meet her. Once they heard her sing, it was clear she had something special. Just like that, Lindsey and Stevie became members of Fleetwood Mac. It was a life-changing moment. Suddenly, the two struggling musicians from Buckingham Nicks were part of a real band, with a record deal, a fan base, and a future. From the outside, it looked like Stevie and Lindsey had just landed their big break, but behind the scenes, things were already messy. They were joining a band that had its own set of complicated relationships. Fleetwood Mac already included married couple John and Christine McVie, but their marriage was falling apart. Now, with Stevie and Lindsey coming in, the personal drama doubled. By the time they started recording the Fleetwood Mac album in 1975, Stevie and Lindsey's relationship was already unstable. They had been fighting for years, worn down by financial stress and the pressure of chasing fame. Being in Fleetwood Mac made those fights worse. Lindsey could be cold and controlling. Stevie, on the other hand, was stubborn and ambitious. They loved each other, but they also resented each other. The tension between them was growing. Still, they worked together well in the studio. The Fleetwood Mac album became a huge success. Songs like Rhiannon, written by Stevie, turned her into a rising star. Lindsey's guitar playing stood out, and his contributions gave the band a sharp, modern sound. Even though the music was taking off, their personal relationship was falling apart. By the end of making the album, Stevie and Lindsey had officially broken up as a couple. After the Fleetwood Mac album became a hit, the band went into the studio to record their next album. That album would become Rumours, one of the most famous records of all time. But behind the scenes, it was complete chaos. Everyone in the band was going through some kind of heartbreak or drama. Christine McVie and John McVie were divorcing, Mick Fleetwood's marriage was falling apart, and Stevie and Lindsey were still trying to work together after breaking up. Stevie has said that during the Rumours sessions, she and Lindsey would fight constantly. They were living out their breakup in front of the band, the producers, and even the recording engineers. The studio sessions were full of tension, arguments, and emotional pain. But something strange happened. The more they fought, the better the music got. Even though they were furious with each other, they still had undeniable creative chemistry. When they sang together, their harmonies were beautiful, even if they were singing about how much they hurt each other. And soon, their fights would turn physical, and things would get even darker. Affairs and rivalry. After Rumours made Fleetwood Mac one of the biggest bands in the world, things between Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham didn't get better. They got worse. They weren't just dealing with heartbreak anymore. Now there were affairs, jealousy, and deep emotional damage on both sides. In 1977, right after Rumours came out, Stevie started an affair with someone who would complicate things even more. Mick Fleetwood, the band's drummer. The relationship was short, but it created a major storm within the band. Mick had been a close friend of Lindsey's, and Lindsey saw this as yet another betrayal. The affair was also painful for Christine McVie, who had been close friends with Mick's wife, Jenny. Suddenly, Fleetwood Mac wasn't just full of broken relationships, it was full of betrayal on every level. Meanwhile, Lindsey didn't sit quietly either. He had his own flings during this time. Sometimes they were with women close to the band, sometimes not. But unlike Stevie, who wore her heart on her sleeve, Lindsey kept his relationships quieter. That made the whole thing more frustrating for Stevie, who saw Lindsey as cold and calculating. They weren't just exes anymore, they were rivals, both professionally and emotionally. Every success Stevie had seemed to bother Lindsey, and every new woman in Lindsey's life made Stevie more bitter. Adding to the emotional weight was a deeply personal event for Stevie. During this time, she had a relationship with Don Henley of the Eagles. That relationship resulted in a pregnancy. Stevie later decided to have an abortion, something she spoke about years later with regret and sadness. She said she felt it was the right decision for her life at that time, but it left a scar emotionally. The pressures of fame, constant touring, and unstable relationships left her feeling lost, even though to the outside world, she seemed like a rock star at her peak. By 1979, Fleetwood Mac was under pressure to release a follow-up to Rumours. Everyone expected them to make another hit record with beautiful melodies and pop hits. But Lindsey Buckingham had a different idea. He didn't want to repeat the formula. Instead, he pushed the band toward making Tusk, a strange, experimental album that sounded nothing like Rumours. Lindsey was inspired by punk and new wave music. He wanted to break away from the smooth, polished pop that made them famous. The other band members, especially Stevie, weren't happy with this shift. Stevie had written songs like Sarah that fit more with the old Fleetwood Mac style, and she didn't understand why Lindsey was determined to make the band's music weirder. Lindsey started acting out in the studio. He was becoming more controlling, more aggressive, and more distant. By this time, the band was using massive amounts of cocaine, drinking heavily, and barely functioning as a team. Stevie and Lindsey fought constantly, and their fights were no longer just about music. They were personal, sharp, and cruel. One of the most disturbing moments during this time was when reports surfaced that Lindsey physically pushed Stevie against a car during an argument. Some witnesses said he even tried to choke her. These were no longer just fights between ex-lovers. They were dangerous confrontations fueled by anger, drugs, and emotional exhaustion. Stevie later said that she didn't feel safe around Lindsey anymore. Tusk finally came out, but it didn't live up to Rumours in sales. It was still successful, but nowhere near what the record label hoped for. The creative experiment had left Fleetwood Mac divided. Stevie was angry that her songwriting was being overshadowed by Lindsey's strange ideas, and Lindsey felt trapped in a band that didn't share his creative vision. The band was beginning to fall apart, not just as a musical group, but as friends, co-workers, and partners. By the early 1980s, Stevie had had enough. She started focusing on her solo career. In 1981, she released Belladonna, her first solo album. The album was a massive success. Songs like Edge of 17 and her duet with Tom Petty, Stop Draggin' My Heart Around, made her a star completely separate from Fleetwood Mac. Finally, she was standing on her own, no longer just the singer in someone else's band. But Stevie's success only made things worse between her and Lindsey. Lindsey resented the attention she was getting. He felt that Tusk had been ignored. And now Stevie was out there getting awards, radio hits, and magazine covers. The more successful she became, the colder Lindsey got. Their fights on stage during Fleetwood Mac tours became noticeable. Stevie would make sharp comments or give cutting looks at Lindsey during performances. Lindsey would respond by playing aggressively or mocking Stevie's stage presence. Sometimes they wouldn't even look at each other during entire shows. And soon, it would all explode into something they couldn't walk away from: the physical confrontation. By the mid-1980s, Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham's relationship was beyond repair. They had been in Fleetwood Mac together for over a decade, and the personal damage was deep. By now, it wasn't just emotional fights or jealousy, it was open resentment. But even with all that tension, they were still making music together. In 1987, Fleetwood Mac was preparing to release Tango in the Night, their next big album. Lindsey played a major role in the creation of Tango in the Night. He wasn't just contributing guitar or vocals, he was producing much of the album and shaping the sound of the songs. But while he was pouring energy into the recordings, he was pulling further and further away from the rest of the band, especially Stevie. They were barely speaking unless they had to, and when they did talk, it usually led to an argument. As Tango in the Night was about to be released, the band was preparing for a major tour. The album was shaping up to be a commercial hit, and the tour was going to be huge. But there was a problem. Lindsey didn't want to go. After years of fighting, drugs, exhaustion, and creative disagreements, he had nothing left to give emotionally. That tension finally exploded into violence at a band meeting held at Christine McVie's house. Everyone was gathered to discuss plans for the upcoming tour. Stevie and Lindsey got into a heated argument, and something in Lindsey snapped. According to multiple reports, including interviews with Stevie later, Lindsey either pushed or tried to choke her. Some said he threw her against a car. Christine McVie and others were there and tried to break it up, It was ugly. This wasn't just yelling anymore. This was physical violence between two people who had once been deeply in love. During that confrontation, Stevie shouted the now famous line, "Get that asshole out of my life." That moment summed up everything that had been building between them since their early days in Los Angeles. Years of love, betrayal, frustration, and pain all erupted at once. For Stevie, it was both heartbreaking and necessary. She had held on for so long, but now she was ready for Lindsey to be gone for good. Shortly after that fight, Lindsey quit Fleetwood Mac. He left before the Tango in the Night tour even began. It wasn't just a professional decision, it was personal. He didn't want to tour with people he felt betrayed by, especially Stevie. He didn't want to stand on stage next to her every night, pretending to be a happy family for the crowd. The band had been falling apart for years, and now it finally broke. To the public, the story was much more controlled. The official version was that Lindsey left to focus on his solo career or because of creative differences. But behind that was the real story. Years of private anger, personal betrayals, creative fights, and one final violent argument that made everything snap. For Stevie, Lindsey's departure was complicated. Part of her was devastated. Despite all the pain, there was still a deep connection between them musically, and losing him from the band felt like losing a limb, but at the same time, she felt relief. She didn't have to live in that constant tension anymore. The man she had loved, fought with, written songs about, and shared a life with was finally out of her day-to-day world. And just when it seemed like they might never cross paths again, fate had other plans. Cold War and reunion. After Lindsey Buckingham left Fleetwood Mac in 1987, it seemed like that chapter was closed. But by the late 90s, nostalgia was strong, and the band saw an opportunity to come back together. In 1997, they reunited for The Dance, a live album and MTV special that brought them back into the spotlight. All 5 members from the classic Rumours lineup were back: Stevie, Lindsey, Mick Fleetwood, John McVie, and Christine McVie. On the surface, it was a celebration. The band's chemistry on stage was still powerful. The album sold millions, and the tour was a huge success. But emotionally, nothing had really healed. Lindsey had agreed to come back, but the bitterness between him and Stevie was just under the surface. One moment from The Dance became famous in its own right. During their live performance of Silver Springs, a song Stevie had written during the Rumours era about their breakup, the old emotions came flooding back. As they sang the song together on stage, Stevie locked eyes with Lindsey during the final buildup of the song. Her face was filled with anger, pain, and defiance. It wasn't just a performance, it was a confrontation in front of millions of viewers. That moment, known by fans as the Silver Springs Stare, later became an internet legend. You can still find videos and GIFs of Stevie's death stare all over social media. It summed up everything between them: decades of love, betrayal, unfinished business, and hurt feelings. Even though they were standing next to each other singing, it was clear that their personal story was still alive, raw, and unresolved. After The Dance, Fleetwood Mac did more tours and projects together, but the relationship between Stevie and Lindsey stayed tense. They could make beautiful music together on stage, but behind the scenes, they were barely holding it together. In interviews, the passive aggression was obvious. Stevie would often make sharp, carefully chosen comments about Lindsey. She never attacked him outright, but she would say things like, "Lindsey was always hard to work with," or hint that he was controlling or selfish in the studio. Lindsey wasn't much better. He would fire back with remarks about Stevie's diva behavior, or criticize her songwriting as unfocused or too pop. Even their musical collaborations were filled with tension. When they worked on new material, it was often strained. They didn't trust each other fully anymore. Stevie wanted to go in one direction, usually focusing on emotional lyrics and big melodies. Lindsey wanted more experimental sounds, strange arrangements, and creative control. Neither one wanted to bend to the other, and it showed in their work together. Christine McVie, who had left Fleetwood Mac in 1998, returned to the band in 2014. Christine's return was a positive thing in some ways. She helped balance the group dynamic a little, and it gave Fleetwood Mac more of their classic sound. But even with Christine back, the divide between Stevie and Lindsey was as wide as ever. And soon, that Cold War would finally boil over for good. The end of Fleetwood Mac. After years of fighting, breakups, reunions, and Cold Wars, it all finally came to an end in 2018. The moment that triggered the final split between Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham happened at an event called MusiCares Person of the Year. This was a Grammy-related event honoring Fleetwood Mac for their contributions to music. On the surface, it should have been a celebration. But behind the scenes, things were about to fall apart for good. During the rehearsals and planning for MusiCares, tensions between Stevie and Lindsey flared up again. There were disagreements over things like the timing of their entrance, the way the speeches were handled, and even how Stevie's famous song Rhiannon would be introduced. Lindsey apparently rolled his eyes during one of Stevie's speeches, something she noticed and took personally. To Stevie, it was a sign of disrespect, another example of how Lindsey treated her like she didn't matter, even after all these years. Stevie later said that Lindsey's attitude at that event was the final straw. After decades of emotional wounds, public fights, and private insults, she decided she couldn't work with him anymore. According to people close to the band, Stevie gave the group an ultimatum. Either he goes or I do. There wasn't going to be another reunion, another tour with both of them standing awkwardly side by side. This time, it was going to end. The band sided with Stevie. Lindsey Buckingham was fired from Fleetwood Mac in 2018. Just like that, after over 40 years of history together, it was over. Lindsey didn't quit. He was pushed out by the rest of the group, with Stevie leading the decision. After Lindsey was fired, the situation quickly became public. Fans were shocked. People wanted to know what really happened. And pretty soon, the fighting moved from backstage to the media. Lindsey responded by filing a lawsuit against Fleetwood Mac. He claimed that he was fired without proper notice or financial settlement. It was messy. The band didn't say much in public, but Lindsey was vocal in interviews, expressing his frustration. He talked about how the band had betrayed him, and how Stevie's influence over the others had led to his removal. He didn't hide his bitterness, especially about Stevie. Lindsey said that Stevie had always resented him, and now she had used her power to finally get rid of him. Stevie eventually gave her side of the story too. She talked about emotional abuse, about years of being treated poorly by Lindsey. She said she had put up with it long enough, and that his behavior at MusiCares had been disrespectful, not just to her, but to the entire band. Stevie didn't hold back. She described her decision to fire Lindsey as a way to protect herself and to finally move forward without the constant weight of their broken relationship hanging over her. The lawsuit between Lindsey and Fleetwood Mac was eventually settled privately. The details were never fully revealed, but both sides seemed ready to put the legal fight behind them. Personally, though, the damage was done. The partnership between Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham was officially broken beyond repair. After Lindsey's firing, Fleetwood Mac continued for a while without him. They brought in Mike Campbell from Tom Petty's band and Neil Finn from Crowded House to help fill the gap on guitar and vocals. They toured again, and the shows were successful. But to longtime fans, it didn't feel like the same band anymore. The heart of Fleetwood Mac's music had always been the complicated, fiery connection between Stevie and Lindsey, no matter how toxic it was. Then, in 2022, something happened that truly marked the end of an era. Christine McVie passed away. Christine's death hit the band hard. Stevie wrote a heartfelt public tribute, calling Christine her best friend in the world. Lindsey also released a respectful statement, saying that Christine's death was a profound loss. Even though Stevie and Lindsey were no longer speaking, Christine's passing reminded everyone of the family they used to be, no matter how broken. After Christine's death, people began asking the question, is Fleetwood Mac done for good? Stevie made her answer very clear. In recent interviews, she said bluntly, Fleetwood Mac is done. Without Christine, without Lindsey, and with decades of emotional scars, it was finally over. There would be no reunion, no healing moment, no final tour. Stevie breaks silence. In 2024, Stevie Nicks finally gave one of her most direct statements about Lindsey Buckingham. Speaking to Rolling Stone, she opened up about how she really felt about their relationship, their history, and how things ended between them. After years of staying fairly quiet about the details, this was one of the rare times Stevie spoke clearly and firmly about why she chose to completely cut ties with Lindsey. In the interview, Stevie didn't sound angry. She didn't cry or get emotional. Instead, her tone was calm, steady, and matter-of-fact. It was clear that this was a decision she had thought about for a long time. She told Rolling Stone she had absolutely no regrets about how things played out with Lindsey. In her words, "I gave him more than 300 million chances." That quote hit hard. It summed up decades of frustration, disappointment, and emotional exhaustion. To her, she had done everything she could to make their relationship, personal or professional, work. She didn't owe him anything more. One of the most interesting parts of that interview was when Stevie talked about their final interaction. The last time she and Lindsey spoke was at a very emotional event, Christine McVie's celebration of life. The memorial was held at Nobu in Malibu, a beautiful place that suddenly turned chaotic. As Stevie described it, a strange storm rolled in during the memorial. Christine threw down a hurricane on top of Nobu, she said. The wind tore down the decorated deck, scattering everything. Stevie believed it almost felt like Christine was there in spirit, making her presence known during such an important moment for the band and its members. Amid that emotional chaos, Stevie and Lindsey spoke for about 3 minutes. That was it. No big reunion, no emotional apology, no dramatic scene. Just a short, final conversation. Stevie didn't share exactly what they said, but she made it clear that those few minutes told her everything she needed to know. That brief encounter confirmed her decision. She was done. There would be no friendship, no professional reunion, nothing. "I dealt with Lindsey for as long as I could," she said simply. And with that, she made it clear she had moved on for good. If you found this video interesting, give us a like and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next one. Thanks for watching.